Has there ever been a musician as talented as they were controversial? I'd have to think pretty hard to come up with one that would compare to David Crosby in talent and controversy. It seems to spend as many days on the charts as he did in the tabloids and headlines. I say this tongue-in-cheek, of course. David Crosby to me might have been one of the best songwriters, harmony singers, and musicians I've ever heard. So let's take a quick look back on this guy and try to figure him out a little, which I will warn you right now is almost impossible. David Van Cortlandt Crosby was born in Los Angeles, California in 1941. His father Floyd was an award-winning cinematographer. His mother Aleph was a salesperson at Macy's. His parents divorced in 1960, and his father then married a lady named Betty Andrews. David had an older brother, Ethan, born in 1937, who taught him how to play guitar and started his musical career with him. But later on, Ethan got fed up with the music business and society as well, and moved up to a cabin in Northern California. He then basically became a hermit. In the fall of 1997, Ethan hadn't been seen for several months, so someone went up looking for him and found an apparent suicide note in the tiny hand-built cabin that had served as his home. In the note, he expressed his desire that his body be left alone and undisturbed so that it could return to the earth. But no sign of Ethan or his body was there. The following spring, his decomposed body was found in the woods, partially eaten by bears. Investigators determined the cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. David finished high school with correspondence courses, and he then briefly studied drama at Santa Barbara City College before dropping out to pursue a career in music. He was 16 when he got his first guitar from his older brother Ethan, who had started playing years earlier. David started out in the early 60s performing folk music. He says, "I'd learn 2 chords and I'd go back and forth between them." What took it to the next level was my brother started listening to 1950s style jazz. Dave Brubeck, Chet Baker, players like that. Listening to jazz really widens your world, so I picked up on it. He also gives credit to learning how to sing harmony from listening to the Everly Brothers. He performed with a singer, Terry Collier, in Chicago, but the duo just couldn't seem to land a recording deal. He also performed with a folk group called Les Baxter's Balladeers. David and his brother Ethan were in the group for around a year. David left in early 1963. It was around this time, in '63, David cut his first demo. It was produced by Jim Dixon, who would later go on to manage the Byrds. So one night in 1964, David walked into the famous Troubadour Club and saw a duo on stage. He was immediately impressed with their harmony, so he proceeds to get up on stage with them, adding a third part of harmony to their singing. The duo consisted of Gene Clark and Jim McGuinn, later to change his first name to Roger. McGuinn said that after meeting David that night and harmonizing some songs, David said, "If I can be in your band, I know this guy, Jim Dixon, who has a recording studio we can use for free." I said, "That's cool," and we became a trio. They named themselves the Jet Set, later on to become the Byrds. David had a very good ear for singing. He could also sing about any harmony part to a song that was in his vocal range, and had an uncanny knack for being able to blend his voice with the other singers to where it was hard to pick out his voice. It was a kind of harmony that you didn't notice it really, but if it wasn't there, you would miss it in a heartbeat. So after adding Michael Clark to play drums in the summer of 1964, and then Chris Hillman to play bass in October, the Jet Set was to be renamed the Byrds. With Gene Clark, McGuinn, and David taking the front line, you could really tell at this time that the band and the management were trying to cash in on the British invasion. especially what the Beatles were bringing to the airwaves and television. Even the spelling of their name, with the I in Byrds being changed to a Y, as was the A in Beatles replaced one of the E's. The early recordings used a few session players to hold down the bass and drums. Michael Clarke was still getting the feel for playing drums, as he had only played congas before that, but he had the right look for the band. And Chris Hillman was a mandolin player before coming into the group. Most of the earlier recordings had Ray Pullman on bass and Earl Palmer on drums. Both of them are well-known and very talented session players. The Byrds' original lineup wasn't to last very long, only a few years, with songwriter and vocalist Gene Clark to leave first, and then drummer Michael Clarke a little later. And in 1967, Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman was to fire David Crosby. To try and go through all of the stories and reasons given for David's firing would be impossible. So I think to keep this video moving along for now, I'll just quote David himself from 2018, and this probably sums it up the best. They threw me out of the Byrds because I was an asshole. David didn't seem to hold any bitterness toward his old bandmates, and things likely turned out for the best in the long run. Fortunately, the band would put their past behind them once they all matured a little, and would reunite in 1972, as well as again in 1989, with Clarke, Crosby, and Michael Clarke all back in the fold. By this time, David was shifting into party mode. His house in the hills was a hot spot for fun. Patty Harrison, wife of Beatles George Harrison, tells of a story from 1967 when her and George were in L.A. for a few months that summer. She says they were invited over to David's house for a party, and when they got there, they noticed the swimming pool was full of naked people. Not knowing many of the guests except for David, they decided to enter through the house. She said they were sitting on the couch looking around when David come walking in naked, smoking a joint, and he just stood there and talked to them. She went on to say that while they were there, the guy came to do the pool maintenance. All the naked people and pot smoking didn't seem to bother him at all. He was probably used to it. After his firing from the Byrds, David was to again run into a couple of singers, Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springfield and Graham Nash of the Hollies. Once the three got together for a few singing sessions, they knew they had a great vocal blend. Graham Nash later sang in a 2014 interview, "We knew what we were doing," referring to the success of each of the individual bands. Whatever sound Crosby, Stills, and Nash had was born in 30 seconds. That's how long it took us to harmonize. A little later on, Stephen Stills' former Buffalo Springfield bandmate, Neil Young, was added to the group. But in the beginning, it was just Crosby, Stills, and Nash. David would always say this about their first album. They could perform the entire album anywhere, any place, with just the three of them singing and a couple of acoustic guitars. That's all they needed. As with the Byrds, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young didn't have a lot of time together before the trouble started, and the firings and the breakups would happen. But in the meantime, the parties never slowed down for all of them, especially David. But soon the fun turned into addictions and a total loss of self-control. Many think the turning point in David's life was in 1969, when his longtime girlfriend, Christine Hinton, was killed in a car accident. Either way, David's alcohol and drug use just escalated. Don Felder, who ended up doing a short tour with Crosby and Graham Nash right before Don joined the Eagles, spent some time with David and Graham, and even worked on stage with them. He said Crosby was the first person he had worked with who used massive amounts of cocaine. He found him distant and said he always felt wary of him. I believe this would have been around the fall of 1973. David had a few run-ins with the law over drugs and firearms and served time in a Texas prison for drug charges. He said the time in prison in 1985 helped him get off drugs. By then, he had spent most of his money on cocaine and heroin over the years and was pretty much broke at that time, too. I do think the time in prison got him off the hard drugs. David was also detained in New York in 2004 on allegations related to both firearms and drugs. The only drug present was marijuana. David was detained for the offense for over 12 hours before being eventually freed on $3,500 bond. He admitted to the accusations, and in exchange for a $5,000 fine, no jail term was imposed. It appears that his criminal record has been clear ever since. Many thought David wouldn't live to see the 1980s, much less live long past them. David himself shakes his head when he thinks back. He says that Jimmy, Mama Cass, and Janice, all friends and people he hung out with, died from drugs. Why didn't I? He pauses and simply says quietly, I don't know. His drug and alcohol use was a factor to his health decline. He received a liver transplant in 1994. At that time, he had a chronic case of hepatitis C. He had heart issues and had to have stents put in, and he also had diabetes. In 2000, it was revealed that he was the biological father, by sperm donation, of the two children of singer Melissa Etheridge and her then partner, Julie Cypher. I don't know how true it is, but it was said that Dennis Hopper's character, Billy, in the 1969 movie Easy Rider, was modeled after David Crosby. True or not, it sure seems to hold some water to me. I used to follow David on Twitter just to see how much crap he was stirring up. I still remember seeing the final tweet on the day he died. He was responding to a post declaring that people with tattoos, short people, and those who drink alcohol or eat pork will not go to heaven. David replied to it saying, I heard the place is overrated. Cloudy. He used to crack me up with his tweets. David was entertaining. Just a bit hard to figure out at most times. I don't think anyone ever figured David out, including himself. He did seem a lot closer to it at the end of his life, though. There is no doubt David had a way with words. He was a brilliant songwriter. When writing, you have time to edit and think about what you have to say. But in real-life situations, that isn't always the case. And so many times, David spoke without editing, and it cost him a little. His talent is undeniable. He had to have been one of the best harmony singers ever. He said as a child he would play the Everly Brother records over and over, adding a third part to their harmony. And when he put that third part with Stills and Nash, it was just like magic. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Byrds and once with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He played and sang up until his body just gave out at 81 years old. 81. And that to me is amazing that it lasted that long. Have any comments or stories of your own about David? Please feel free to put them in the comments section. I always like reading through them. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. And help it along. And ring that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you all later.